Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
So I've got all my girls here. Wave. So I just said to them that maybe if you want to talk for a little while about the questions. Oh.
We have a connection problem at the moment.
Is that better?
It's still saying there's a problem.
Okay. We're okay at our end. Do you want me to hang up and try again?
Let's try and go ahead now. And
Okay.
if you can't hear me, let me know.
Yep.
And if I can't hear you, I'll tell you.
Okay. Okay, so I said to the girls that maybe if you want to run through some of the questions, and then we'll open it up to them if they've got some questions as well for you.
Sure.
Excellent.
Give me your first question.
Oh, so the ones that I've emailed prior. So.
Hang on, well, I have to go out.
Oh, okay. Yep. No worries. Maybe I'll do it. I'll open up my. Hang on, I'll find it.
You sound like you're at the bottom of the swimming pool. I remember what it was. The first question was about, how secure the world food supply is. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, we've got a situation where with population and economic growth combined, the demand for food worldwide is going to double by the 2060s. So that's over the next 50 years, over your lifetimes. However, everything that we need to do to actually to grow more food, to produce more food, is running out. So we're running out of soil, we're running out of water, we're destroying environments left, right and centre. We haven't been investing in agricultural science and technology. We're running out of particularly the fertilisers that have given us the great, huge increase in food in the last 50 years. They're finite, okay? A lot of them are produced from mines, and those mines have a use-by date. So we're going to run out of fertiliser sometime in the century. We're going to run out of water in the next 15 to 20 years. Water is the first crisis that is going to strike the world. That's not my forecast, that's the United Nations saying that by the 2030s, demand for water is going to be 40% larger than the actual supply. And at the same time, of course, you see all these big coal companies and fracking companies, whatever, they're taking the farmers' water. So farmers are going to be asked to double the world's food supply while we take away half their water. How do you do that? It's impossible. So what this means is there's some very big challenges coming down in food, and they're all going to happen in your lifetime, and you will have the job of actually sorting them out. And we need to start thinking about them now, because they're not things that can be solved, in a matter of a few years, and there are no techno fixes, there are no easy solutions to this.
So, where do we start? In terms of which suppliers do we look at, supply side factors do we look at, where do we start to solve the problem?
Well, you have to look at all. If you solve the problem of water and you don't solve the problem of soil, then we're just going to lose all our farmland. In every meal that each one of you eats wastes 10 kilograms of topsoil. So even your sandwich that you're going to have for lunch, there will be a bucketful of topsoil lost to produce that sandwich. Okay, and that applies to every human being in the world. Now, if we don't stop sending our soil down the rivers and out to sea and on the wind and things like that, we don't stop doing it, then we are, we're just basically going to run out of places to grow crops because there won't be the soil there for them. So we need to think about new ways of producing crops, particularly food in general, that do not involve large quantities of land and large quantities of water. And there are some very exciting new technologies coming along in that space.
So they did for this unit finish off looking at urban farms. So do you think that's the way the future and hydroponics and whatnot?
That's certainly a way that you can sustain your urban food supply. At the moment, we've got a crazy system where people bring food from all over the world. A lot of your food in your supermarket comes from 10,000 kilometres away. And an enormous amount of carbon dioxide is released just to get that to you. Why don't we just grow the food in and around Brisbane? Or at least, make sure that city never starves, because if there's a big war or something like that, the food won't come. It won't be delivered to the supermarkets. We know what happened in the Sunshine Coast when the floods came in 2011. The supermarkets were empty in 48 hours. So a big city can run out of food in no time at all. And that's the danger that we're facing at the moment. So we need to reinvent food production in cities. And the reason for this is that cities actually concentrate enormous quantities of water and enormous quantities of nutrients. All that food that goes down the sewer system, all the food that we throw in the landfill, in the garbage, that can all be recycled and used to produce new food. So if we throw those things away, as we are doing at the moment, and you put them in a big pipe and pump them out into the Pacific Ocean, if you do that, we're going to run out of nutrients at some point, and we're going to run out of water. But if you recycle water and nutrients, you have a food supply that is sustainable in the long term.
Does anyone else have any questions about that? No?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I've got some wind in the room, so I think it's having an issue with our camera. We've got some howling wind.
Oh, right.
Something else they've been looking at is your map in chapter 2 of Coming Famine, the conflict map. So maybe if you wanted to discuss that a little bit. So the correlation between conflict and food security, or insecurity, I guess.
Absolutely. If you look at that map, you can see a whole lot of little stars, which is where wars are broken out. And of course, nearly all of those stars are concentrated in countries that are food, land and water insecure. Right? So where people don't have enough food or land or water, they tend to fight it. Okay, so their argument might be a political one, a religious one, an ethnic one, something like that. But the point that a lack of food or a lack of food security is very often a pretext for conflict. If you go right back through the wars of history, you will realise that nearly always when people fight, it is over a scarcity of things you need to maintain life. And food is very important in all of those. So if you think of the French Revolution, before the French did away with the monarchy, there was a bread crisis. Remember Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake." The people were starving, and that made them angry enough to tear down their government. The Russian Revolution, likewise, in 1906, and afterwards there were bread crises. There were people starving people on the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg, and that led to the Communist Revolution in Russia. So, and we saw the same thing in Egypt in 2012. There were women on the streets with their mobile phones in their hands protesting over the high price and the lack of bread. And those protests grew and grew and grew, and more people joined, and they ended up tearing down the Egyptian government. So very often these turmoils, civil wars and international wars begin triggered by food scarcity or food insecurity. But if you look at that map, please look at the places where there are no stars. If you look at the places where there are no stars, there are places like North America, Australasia, Northern Europe, and so on. There have been no wars in those places for the last 50 years. And the reason is that we are food and water and land secure. Okay, and for the time being. If other countries become insecure, for example, there is a collapse of water availability in northern China or on the Indo-Gangetic plains, as there well may be, there are going to be hundreds of millions of refugees coming in all directions. So 50 million could come down and just completely swamp Australia. And we would not have the Australia that we're growing up with today if those people fled a food crisis in the mid-century. So this is why we need to attend not just to our own food security here in Australia, but also to what's happening around the world. Those sorts of collapses that trigger a tsunami of refugees do not happen in our neighbourhood.
And then I guess, an issue you touched on developed countries, and there's no conflict in those developed countries. What do we see about that trend with these multinational companies from developed regions that are outsourcing and using resources in some of these developing countries? How do we alleviate that?
Well, unfortunately, that's the world economy, and economies are red in tooth and claw, which means there's not much you can do. These big companies can't be controlled. We know that they don't even pay taxes here in Australia. These international companies don't pay enough, their fair share of taxes. So they're basically beyond the control of governments. Okay, this is a very big question, because it's completely changing the role of governments. Globalisation is changing what governments are, how they're governed, and things like that. In fact, it's weakening. We may even lose our nation states, things that we've grown up with for the last 200 years. But I don't want to sort of get too buried in that. The only thing that controls the behaviour of a multinational is your behaviour. But you, as a consumer, are the only person that can tell a large company when you spend your consumer dollar whether you like its products or you don't like it. Okay, so if people start buying products from multinationals that have a green approach, and they produce food sustainably, and they look after farmers, and they look after landscapes and wildlife, if you patronise those companies ultimately will dominate the economy. And if you take your money away from the companies that have bad behaviour, that screw farmers, that destroy landscapes, so there's a lot of work here for you to find out which companies are good and which ones are bad. Okay, but that is the responsibility of every global citizen now. We all have to find that out, and we all have to send that priceless economic signal by our purchasing decisions. If you want sustainable food, you want your children to have sustainable food, you have to ignore the companies who are producing it unsustainable. Refuse to buy their stuff, and they will get the economic signal quick smart.
Does any other questions? I've got one more, but does anyone else have any clarification? Come up here, Lily, if you want to ask it.
Okay, I'll ask my question. Is that close enough? Can you hear me? You've talked about the value in changing how we farm. What about what we are farming?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we only eat a tiny, tiny percentage of all of the plants that are available. I mean, if you actually go in your supermarket, even though there's 4,000 or 5,000 different food products, they're all made from 5 grains and 5 almonds. So, in actual fact, our food system is very, very narrow. If you actually go in the supermarket as an exercise and count how many different plants are on sale there, so you've got the wheat plant, the rice plant, the beans, etc. If you count all the different species of plant, you probably only find there's 50 or 100 in that whole supermarket. But there's 27,000 edible plants on our planet. So we have not yet begun to explore the earth in terms of all the things that are good to eat. And if you think about Australia, we've been living here, Europeans have been living here for 250 years. But we still, the 6,000 edible Australian plants, how many of those do you eat regularly every day? Probably none. Okay, you might have a macadamia nut once in a blue moon, you might have a little bit of bush pepper or something like that, but there's nothing Australian in our diet at all. And that's a disgrace. That just says that we Australians are slow learners. And we are not paying attention to the natural wealth of our own country. So taking all of these plants that are not being eaten around the world and building industries and building foods and healthy diets around them is a huge opportunity. It's an exciting opportunity for farmers, for chefs, for cookbook writers and food writers. So it's buried treasure, really, and we just have to find the key.
And then, you know, from your previous question, when you're talking about we have to have a global approach to things, to these responses, how in chapter 1 you talk about you know, this rising of the middle classes in India and China. You know, to me, I think when we were reading it, it's quite scary thinking about they want this tapping into a lot of this consumerism and the American way of living and high protein diet. You know, how do we stop that kind of disaster happening?
Yeah. You know, look, you're quite right. If you're a computer programmer from Bangalore, you're going to want to eat hamburgers. You're not going to want to eat lentil stew like your grandparents did. So Indians and in China, there's been an absolutely dramatic increase in meat eating. Now in the 1930s, 98% of the Chinese diet was vegetarian. Today, every Chinese is eating about 60 kilos of meat a year, and that's about half what we Australians and the Americans eat. So they're halfway to where we are. And that, of course, meat has a huge footprint on the planet. We can only really do it by education. I believe we need to have a year of food in every school on the planet, because if kids don't know how precious their food is, if they don't know what's sustainable and what isn't, they're going to grow up sending the wrong signals to the market. They'll end up buying the wrong foods. And the companies will keep on producing the wrong foods, the foods that do damage. So again, it's a case of educating the consumer from the word go. And I believe this is possible because we all saw what happened in the Clean Up Australia campaign. The kids who taught the parents not to throw their beer cans and cigarettes out of the car window. Right? It was the kids who led the revolution because they had been trained in school. So, you know, schools that are involved in food production actually as part of the curriculum, and having food as a part of every single different subject that you study. When you study sport, for example, you learn where your energy comes from. So it's not just about cooking and things like that, it's having food in every part of the curriculum, in science, in geography, in mathematics, in languages. I believe if we connect ourselves with food in this way, we will have a much more educated consumer, whether they're Chinese, Australian, or Icelandic.
Okay. Girls, does anyone else have any questions? Quick, speak now. So you're all going to do well in the exam. No one's got any more questions? Probably the last question I was going to think about was, you know, in a country like Australia, how do we envisage the future of farming when we are on such a dry continent? You know, is it putting pressure on the government to start utilising renewable energy sources? Is it localised farming? A combination of these approaches? What do we see in the future of farming in Australia?
Well, one of the things we do very badly in Australia is reward our farmers. You know, the supermarkets have created this cheap thing where farmers are very badly rewarded for producing meat or grains or vegetables, and they in turn punish the landscape. So you punish the farmer and farmers punish the landscape. And that is an unsustainable system. It starts with the supermarkets, and the supermarkets start with the orders that we, the consumer, give to them. So if they can get away with cheap and nasty food, and this food is killing 3/4 of Australians, right? 3/4 of Australians now die from a diet-related disease. Okay, so take that on board and think about your health when you choose your food. We have to change that system. We have to start rewarding farmers much more for not only producing beautiful food, but also for looking after the landscape. So I actually think there should be a GST, a tax on food, which goes back to the farmers so they can repair the landscape. Because they're not going to be able to repair the landscape on the money the supermarkets now pay. So that's a really important part of it. I think we should actually reduce the footprint of agriculture. I think we should halve the amount of farming we physically do in Australia. The amount of grazing, the amount of cropping. And we can do that by growing more food in the cities and growing less food, but for a higher price on our best country. in the rural areas. So farmers will be much better rewarded, and they will look after the landscape much better. They will farm smaller areas in the future. They will farm them more intensively but more greenly so that the diet is a healthy one. But again, it all comes down to us, the consumer, saying we want a safe, healthy and sustainable diet, and we are prepared to pay for that. If we're not prepared to pay for that, you will get rubbish, and it will cause disease. So it's down to us to send these signals to the farmers, to the supermarkets, to everybody in the food chain.
I guess, sorry, that was meant to be the last one. I was just thinking as well, in the third side of that as well is the pressure of biofuels. Where do you see the picture of biofuels too? Because obviously they can strain on any cropping land we have available.
Okay, if you are growing your biofuels on land that could be growing grain or cattle or something like that, that's a really stupid idea. Okay, our world is going to be short of food for the reasons we discussed at the start by the middle of the century. So if we're not going to see major food crises every year, we need to take advantage of that. We don't want to be growing fuel. However, there is a huge opportunity. We currently buy all our petrol, transport fuels from the Arabian Gulf. They come to us via Singapore. We spend $40 billion a year buying Arab fuel. Okay, in this country, 80% of our fuel comes from overseas. If there's an oil crisis or a war, this country actually stops in about 10 days, because that's how much supply of fuel is in the pipeline. And governments don't seem to realise this, and they don't care. But the answer is, if we grew algae, those little green scummy things you find in the pond, algae are water plants, and they consist 50% of oil, and they consist 50% of protein and carbohydrate. So if you take